Welcome to today's webinar, What's New in New Member Orientation, brought to you by NCSL. All lines have been placed on listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Bruce Feustel. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. Welcome from the legislative effectiveness of the National Conference of State Legislatures. We're talking today about new member orientation, an area of legislator training that's dynamic, it's interactive, and it's changing. And we're going to talk about it today with some of the experts in the country who've been involved on the cutting edge. As you'll see from the presenter slide today, we have Wisconsin Senator Sheila Harsdorf, Wyoming Legislative Information Officer Wendy Madsen, and Colorado Chief Economist Natalie Mullis, along with me here at NCSL, and I'm Bruce Feustel. I've done a fair amount of new member orientation work for NCSL. I'm a former Wisconsin legislative attorney and work on legislator and staff training for NCSL. Wendy in Wyoming is responsible for legislator training and has led much of the changes in Wyoming's new member orientation, making it much more dynamic, interactive, and she'll be telling us about that today. Next in our group is Senator Sheila Harsdorf, the Majority Caucus Vice Chairperson most recently, and first served in the Wisconsin legislature in 1988. Senator Harsdorf is noted by the new member orientation organizers as a legislator who really knows what to say, how to say it, and most particularly, how to listen to new members for their questions and the questions they really want to ask but sometimes don't think to ask. And lastly, we have Natalie Mullis, the Chief Economist for the Colorado Legislative Council staff. She forecasts Colorado's economy and governmental revenue, participates in Colorado's new member orientation, and is particularly known for being able to demystify fiscal and budget items, not so much making things simplistic, but simplifying complex information so that new members can get a handle on the critical information that they need. What I'm going to do first is give you an overview of what's new in new member orientation. New members need to be effective immediately. The changes in states most recently have seen a number of states going to term limits, increasingly complex work coming to legislators, some states with extraordinarily short legislative sessions such as Virginia and Wyoming. So legislators have to make tough decisions, but they often have to make them on a very short time frame, which is hard for the new members who don't have the legislative experience to draw back upon. So what do you do in creating a new member orientation? Why is it important that we're talking here, and why is it important that you're spending time in the planning of these new member orientations? Well, really what you have to do is begin with the end in mind. Think together collectively among your orientation planners about what makes a great legislator. What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that a great legislator has, and then how do you begin to build those key skills and abilities and knowledge areas. And to put together your new member orientation, you have to think some about adult learning principles, the ideas that new members and adult learners want to feel like they're in control. They want real and relevant information that you're giving them, and they want the chance to reflect a bit on the kinds of things that are going forward. One other bit of backdrop. We'll be talking a lot today about analytical pieces that you put in, the kinds of things that build knowledge and skill, and the more analytical type things that go into new member orientation. But also new member orientation is about learning to build relationships, learning how to get along with your peers, learning who you trust, who you go to for information, the soft skills that are involved. And new member orientations have to provide some options for building on those relationship building skills as well. Well, what are the trends? I mentioned in introducing Wendy Madsen how she's been involved in the makeover of Wyoming's new member orientation. And a number of states, certainly not all, probably not a majority, but a significant number have made major changes, breathed new life into their new member orientations. They've made them longer in some instances, but spread them out in chunks so that there is reflection time between the various orientation sessions. They've made them much more interactive, where the new members actually get a chance to try on their new skills in a new in a committee chair training session or a floor session, some mock session, or some other kind of interactive discussion situation. But all of this is an emphasis on the new members. Again, the realization that they have to be effective right from the start. And it's also a help to them on two scores. One, new members are operating in a much more transparent environment than new members did maybe 15, 20 years ago. Everything is either out there on YouTube or blogs or in one way or another open to the public. Also, there's an increasingly partisan edge to a number of our legislatures, and the fights and the lack of bipartisanship is showing more and more. And just that chance for new member orientation to lay down some institutional values, to prepare new members for what they're likely to endure is helpful on many scores. So what kind of planning do you do in this? And I noticed that from the sign-in standpoint, a number of you are new member planners. From what you've told us at NCSL, mostly it's a joint venture. It's often a clerk staff, a nonpartisan state agency, or a combination of them from the staff side. But it's also legislative leadership or some key interested legislative leaders or experienced legislators who combine in some sort of formal or informal planning committee to plan well out, starting from this time or even before, what will go into new member orientation, who will be a part of it, how it will go, and that sort of thing. A number of you partner with universities. Texas, Alabama are just two examples where strong university connections work with longtime legislative staff to create great new member orientations. But often that academic input with legislative experience guidance works very well. Most of you run new member orientation for 1 day up to 2.5 days. Some of you do much longer periods of new member orientation, but most of you fall in that 1 to 2.5 day range. What it underscores is that there's little time available to do new member orientation. People are very busy. Even new legislators have old tasks that they have to separate from businesses and that sort of thing. So there's very little time available to you, so you have to make the most of the time that you do have. And often the best way to do that is to break the training into phases, so you have a chance to give reflection time, allow questions to build up between sessions, and so you get more time, more training for your time served. You tend to use traditional presentations and panels, but more and more you'll use mock floor and committee sessions, case studies, and other options to make it as interactive as you can. And in Wisconsin and other states, you're starting to supplement with handbooks, videos, CDs, and other materials to allow the learning to go on between the actual in-person sessions. Also, media workshops, IT workshops, other kinds of workshops can occur outside the formal scope of orientation. For faculty, the gold standard for those of you who are running new member orientations continues to be current and former legislators. The new legislators want to hear from the people who are actually doing it. They have the credibility, they have the knowledge that the new members are hungry for. But you also intersperse your faculty with legislative staff, academics, lobbyists, NCSL, other consultants. So you have a mix of people that you put before your new members. The substantive issues is the area where most of your states vary widely. Some states go as long as a week just on policy issues. Some states leave that solely to the committee process for new members to learn. But most states will have at least some preparation around big items like tax and budget, education, health and welfare, and judiciary. Procedure is pretty standard. The handling of how you request a bill draft and how the bill goes through the process, understanding a bit about the legislative rules, understanding the role of staff and how they can help you, understanding what your committee will be doing and how a bill works through a committee, how you develop your media relations strategy, and how you handle a constituent casework, how you handle your constituent casework are all procedural items that tend to be covered in new member orientation. Technology, you increasingly give a general class or an orientation on IT use, but tend to follow that up with individual follow-up since the individual use level is so varied as new members come in that you need to address much of your orientation individually. Just a couple bits of advice, and I'll be turning this over to Wendy, but just from all of you, the kind of advice that you passed on to your colleagues are plan well ahead. There's almost no way to plan too early on this orientation program. Get the leader's support for whatever you do, and if you don't have the leader's support, stop, go back to them, check in why you don't have it, and gain it. The third and fourth points go together. Focus on the essentials and don't overwhelm the participants. It's almost a greater sin to give them too much than too little. Make your training hands-on, but that sort of soft skill part, give them the chance to get to know each other. They're building relationships, particularly in their own class, but they're also getting to know some of the experienced members and faculty as well. Be flexible. As much planning time as you put into it, you have to be flexible, realizing when a session is going really well and you need more conversation on something, or when something needs to be shortened, when the class needs a break. So as much training as you've and planning as you put into it, you have to keep your finger on the pulse of the orientation and make adjustments to meet the training needs of the group. Provide training in segments to allow reflections. The states that do break it up into segments swear by it. Custom fit the computer training, but give materials to allow continued learning on all these topics. Some people learn more by being in the middle of it. Some people like to read and reflect. Give people options in their learning process. And finally, take the time to do evaluations and get feedback. You won't improve your evaluation, or you won't improve your orientation programs unless you get honest feedback from the people who participated. So that's a quick overview, and now on to our Wyoming new member orientation expert, Wendy Madsen. Wendy, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Bruce. I don't know about the expert part. It feels like every biennium you're kind of starting again, but I think one of the things in that thought of starting again is we about 10 years ago decided to increase our new member training from a day and a half of training to 8.5 days of training, and that came from tremendous leadership support. But I just noticed at the start of this biennium, I've started getting a little bit of pushback on why we do so much training. And a quote from our fiscal officer was basically, kind of a sink or swim approach. We used to not provide them training. Why do we do this? They got along just fine. And it got me to thinking about, is this necessary? Is the level of training we're providing a good investment for Wyoming? And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, looking at our turnover rates, even without term limits, our term limits were declared unconstitutional, but even with that, we still have about 70% of our House and 30% of our Senate with less than 6 years of service. And I think Bruce's point about the institution is really important, because the folks who come in from all walks of life, and they have various backgrounds. And one of the things that they may not have is a good perspective on the importance of the institution. And then finally, as Bruce mentioned, issues at the state level are becoming more and more complex. And I think in so many other areas of life, we talk about the importance of having good knowledge and good background, and it should be no less so for those who provide policy in our states. And so when you look at training and providing training, I think it's important to look at it as a cycle. And I think it's important to start that cycle immediately as soon as your next session ends through formal feedback and informal feedback mechanisms, providing surveys to new members. We actually do a formal survey process of new members of each of our training segments, as well as we sit them down and have basically a roundtable discussion about, after their first general session, what do you wish you'd known more about? What could we do better? We also have informal feedback with our leadership. What did they think went well? What do they think needs to happen the next time? And I think institutionalizing that training, making sure that you have an entity responsible for it, and that entity understands everyone else that needs to have a role for it, budgeting for it in advance. All of these things can help your training cycle live, making it a process and not just an event. I think when you look at planning, and I really feel passionate about involving leadership in planning, because I think then it's owned by the institution, and it's not perceived then as just something staff thinks that new members need to do. In Wyoming, we're very fortunate in that our leadership has bought into this idea of training new members for the past decade, and we include majority and minority leadership so that it's seen as an institutional training, and I think that's very important. I also think in Wyoming we have the luxury of having a pretty small staffing component, so it's easy to know who needs to provide different training. But I think if you can have a committee or the individuals that are involved get on the same page about when training is going to be provided, it just helps everything be better coordinated. Involving NCSL for me has been critical. Bruce and the legislative management team have given me so many ideas about who good speakers are, training approaches that they use, and that's been invaluable. They've also been invaluable in connecting me with other states. Being able to look at other state agendas and feel from them has been a really good experience for Wyoming to not have to reinvent the wheel. When you look at the training cycle itself, I think it's important to think of training as an extension of outreach from your staffing entities and from your members of leadership. And so we say training begins the day after the election. In Wyoming, we have a staff liaison, and I serve in that role to contact every newly elected member the day after the election. We want to be the first individual that those new members hear from. That's not always possible, but we sure try, and begin making that connection with them. Then we try to break out our training into segments so that we bring them in shortly after the election, and then again before the weekend before the general session begins. And when we do that, we are very careful to think about what that member needs to know at that point in time, which transitions into the idea of agenda planning. And so when you look at who should you place on the agenda if you're in the role of a trainer, and I think, again, as Bruce mentioned, hearing it from those in the trenches is more important than just about anyone else they can hear from. But not just members of leadership. I have found that freshmen also like to hear from rank and file members, and most importantly, they often like to hear from those who've just been in their shoes. So we often include sophomores in our training who've most recently been in the freshman shoes. I also think, obviously, this goes without saying, staff has an important role in training, but one of the things, and this is kind of hard to do, but if you have the luxury of being in this role, when you talk to staff about the training they're going to provide, I think it's also important to talk to those staff members who may have content expertise about the pedagogy of training adults, and to talk about adult learning styles, and also to really hone in on what you want that presentation to entail so that they don't get off point. I also think mixing in keynotes and experts in their field gives the training more of a sense of going to an experience, going to a seminar instead of just a training where they have a bunch of talking heads. And then finally, I think it cannot be stressed enough the importance of the role of new members in their own training, because new members have such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and to bring them to the table and let them interact with each other, I think, is an important part of their own training. In terms of providing the training, if you have the luxury of having a number of training days and you have the budget to do it, again, I think breaking it up and bringing them in shortly after the election, and again right before the session, and again when the session's concluding, I think allows folks to reflect a little bit more on what they're learning. But even if you can't do that, I think you can still break it up in terms of keeping things moving, mixing in lecture with small group breakout sessions, with roundtable discussions, with kind of independent work, coming back together as a group. All of those things kind of help keep things moving. I also think developing themes around what it is you want each session to accomplish kind of helps reinforce the idea of learning at that point in time. So for example, when we first bring members in, we title that first day, Your Role in the Wyoming Legislature. And we focus on things like personal conduct and ethics and how they're paid and some very basic things, but about them at the individual level. We have another day where we focus on the institution, another day where we focus on procedure and the importance of custom and decorum. And again, finally, I think in the training, I think having leadership have a presence throughout as MCs and presenters and leading small group breakouts really sets the tone for the entire training. In terms of content, I really think it's important to continually ask yourself to put yourselves in the shoes of a freshman. What does that individual need to know right now? And try not to go any further than that, even though it's very tempting to do so. I also think Wyoming tends to focus on the institution in the training we provide. We provide a lot more training on soft skills, such as consensus building, conflict resolution, because our feeling is you can learn the policy and you're going to get the policy, but this is kind of the one chance you have to learn about the institution. With that said, I do think there's a few perennial hot topics that are important to train on, such as tax structure, and we always include education policy because that's going to come up every single session. But if you can really focus on what they need to know at that moment in time, I think it helps not to overwhelm them. And then finally, looking at when do you consider training done? And I like to think of it as their first biennium, that we are going to be there for them throughout the whole biennium. And one of the things we do at all of their training sessions is we provide them with a resource notebook, and we provide the handouts that are going to be available at the training by day, and that notebook is segmented so that they can very easily go back when they get back to their districts and look up materials that we provided. We continue to have the liaison be the point of contact for the members so that they don't have to remember who is the head of bill drafting, who was it that I contact about payroll. They can continue to just contact the individual they're most familiar with, and we'll make sure we get them to the right place. And then we offer them training sessions throughout their first biennium. We provide interim training right before the interim. There's no sense in our mind in talking about the interim before their first session because they don't need to know that information at that point in time. And then Wyoming has a culture where we've been able to, because of leadership support, provide biennial training for all members. So we see professional development as ongoing, not just for freshmen, but for everyone in the institution. And finally, I think one of the most important things is to think about how not to fire hose these freshmen with so much information. And I think the thing to reassure freshmen is to say, we don't have an expectation that you remember everything we're putting in front of you. We simply want you to remember who to contact when you need to know something. And so I love this quote by Albert Einstein that I think conveys that really well about not knowing everything, just knowing where to find it. And now I'll turn it back over to Bruce.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and also thanks for including those wonderful pictures of Wyoming. Next up, we have Senator Sheila Harsdorf, one of the key faculty members for Wisconsin's new member orientation. Sheila, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, it's good to be with you today, and I would just like to go back to something you said at the very beginning this afternoon, and that is when you become a legislator, you have to be effective immediately. And so that's why these orientation programs are so very important. Most of us come in as a legislator with no training, and so there is a tremendous amount to learn, and these orientations can be extremely helpful. But one of the challenges, because there's so much, and as Wendy mentioned already, the challenge is not to overwhelm that new legislator. But I think it's a great opportunity to introduce legislators to the various legislative agencies that they will have as resources. We, for example, in Wisconsin have the Audit Bureau, the Fiscal Bureau, they do the number crunchers, the bureau that does the bill drafting, and then the various resources that are available to legislators. I think Wendy closed her presentation with a really key point, and that is legislators are not going to remember everything, but they need to know where to go to. They need to know the resources. And so I would, in addition, just to keep going through, we also use our orientation as a way of highlighting the budget process. We also introduce new legislators to 3 branches of government, taking time for, if you have an opportunity to introduce the governor, talk about the executive branch, various state agencies which are part of the executive branch, talking about the legislative branch and an overview of the legislative process, the committee structure, and then the third branch, of course, the judicial. You can have an opportunity to introduce them to the Supreme Court. So they really get a feel for all 3 branches. It's also a time to I think, in this day more than ever, talking about ethics, trying to provide them with a resource so that if they have a question about what is proper and what's not, to avoid getting into unnecessary trouble, it's very important that I think by and large people want to be in compliance and knowing who they can go to make sure that they know what the proper ethics code is. Obviously, lobbyists play a part of the process, and so having an opportunity for someone from the lobbying corps to come in, talking about the role of the lobbying corps, and then also media, how to communicate with the media. And you know, as I talk about these different things, being a legislator is really about building relationships, whether it's with your fellow colleagues, whether it's with the media, and of course your constituents. And one of the things that I've enjoyed being a part of these new member orientations is really, as a legislator, to be able to stress the important role, the important things that we need to keep in mind as legislators. And I've always, from day one, said my top priority is my constituents. And it's really important, I think, that fellow legislators share with new legislators things that they have found to be very important in order to be successful. I think, as Wendy said, I think it's important that I think one of my favorite parts is the legislative panel, having colleagues able to come in. And really on that panel should be a blend of both newer and more veteran legislators, as well as, of course, the various political parties. But legislators themselves can stress the importance of building relationships, being a good communicator, both communicating to your district and how to respond in a timely fashion to your constituents. We have new technology that is continues to get advanced and opens up new opportunities in how we can communicate with our constituents. One of the things that we've done in Wisconsin, and I'm sure across the country, is holding teletown halls, where you can literally hook up thousands of people on a phone call, and you can talk directly with them. They can ask you questions, and you can respond. And so it's a tremendous tool to use in communicating with your constituents. Listening is a very important part. I always stress the importance of listening. It's a big part of our job. Sometimes we don't want to get into the routine of always talking. Listening is a big part of working as a legislator. Again, it's knowing where to get information. As a legislator, it's important to stress that it's not always having the answer, but it's a matter of knowing where to find that answer. So as you have presenters, they are going to be giving an overwhelming amount of information, most likely, to the legislators. I would encourage you to encourage your presenters to have one-page handouts, to have contact information, so that people, so that the legislators can revert back to that as needed, and have that actual physical person of a contact that they can go back and contact when they have additional questions. Another key that's very important, I think, for those who may not be accustomed to managing an office is assistance and advice on managing their staff, and making sure that their staff know their priorities and that they're operating as a team, and working together to of course, serve the constituents. As you put together seminars, I guess I would encourage you to, with a number of things. One, have hands-on, have participation, have plenty of opportunities for dialogue, being able to ask questions, and having, because oftentimes someone else can ask a question, and while we maybe didn't think of it, we're very interested, and that answer can be very helpful to us as well. Try not to overwhelm. Like I said, have those one-page handouts that they can take back and are easy to use as a resource. I guess I also would encourage, obviously time is valuable. We actually are still on a one-day training seminar, orientation in Wisconsin. But I think whether you have one day or multiple, as Wyoming does, it is important to be sensitive to the time constraints of new legislators. As I talked with some of our newer legislators in Wisconsin, as far as having a refresher orientation, there was really mixed reviews on that. And so not everyone felt that would be helpful, but others did. And so I think the bottom line is, as you put the orientations together in your respective states, that you really gear them towards how things work in your state and how your state government operates. So with that, I will turn it back to Bruce.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I really appreciate that in-depth look at Wisconsin. Now we have our great budget demystifier, Natalie Mullis. Natalie, take us through Colorado's approach.
Well, thanks for having me. I love hearing you call me the budget demystifier. It's something I work very hard on. I'm going to talk about Colorado's experience with new member orientation, how we put together our program specifically, what we've learned, and how we're looking to make our program better. The goal of the program is twofold. First, to provide information to new legislators that will be useful to them over their legislative career. And of course, we want it to be accessible and something they can retain. And second, to promote the development of working relationship between the new members and between the new members and legislative staff. The program has 3 phases that are specifically for new members. It takes up about 7 days over the course of 6 weeks following the election. Because of term limits and normal turnover, we tend to have about 20 to 25% of our 100-member legislature turnover after each election. We do have a few that are crossing over from one house to the other and have already been through a new member orientation program. We invite those members to the program, but they aren't required to come. In addition, a spouses program is offered during the first day of Phase 2, and all members are required to attend a training on ethics and sexual harassment at some point during the first 2 weeks of the legislative session that starts in January. I'm going to talk about each of the phases that are listed here on this slide, but first I'd like to talk about some of the resources we provide to new members. Our legislative buddy system has been very successful over the years. We've been doing it for about a decade now. Each new member is assigned 2 staff buddies, one from Legislative Council staff, our main nonpartisan research office, and one from the Office of Legislative Legal Services. These staffers are intended to be an easy point of contact for the new member to access legislative services, to help them navigate the bill drafting process, and to find information they need within state government. We provide an opportunity for them to meet their buddy in person at a designated buddy breakfast during the second phase. And buddies contact the new member by phone, email, and in person during the orientation program as soon as possible, and keep in touch with them throughout their legislative career as needed to make sure their needs are met. We also provide a lot of new written material to the new members throughout the entire program. For each phase, members receive a notebook with written materials. This material can also be accessed by anyone on the web during and after the program, and in fact, I've listed the website here. We also provide them with a copy of the legislative staff directories that list each staff person's contact information and areas of expertise, and a booklet from the Legal Services Office that answers frequently asked questions about bill drafting, the statutes, the legislative process, and about other services provided by that office. So now I'm going to go through each phase and what we provide, the information we provide in each phase. I've titled the first phase of our program The Lay of the Land because it's held just a few days after the election, and it provides new members with the nuts and bolts of what they need to know to get started as new members. We start by showing them around with an introduction to the House and Senate chambers and to the staff of the House and the Senate. We give them some introductory information about the legislative service agencies and what they can do for new members. We tell them about pay and get them signed up for benefits, and then we tell them about their legal rights and responsibilities as members and the security and safety procedures in the Capitol building. We end the program by showing them around the building with an optional tour of the Capitol. I've got a little lecturer up there in the corner of the slide because the main training tool that we use in this phase is just the usual lecture format. However, if you see the one-on-one conversation that's going on there, we emphasize to the new members that one-on-one training is always available on any topic during the entire program and, of course, throughout their legislative career. Phase 3 is held for 3 days in mid-November. During this phase, nonpartisan staff in the Office of Legislative Legal Services describes the process for drafting bills, the deadline schedule related to that, and how a bill becomes law and the overall legislative process. Much of Phase 2 is an interactive process. It gives members hands-on experience of legislative procedure in the committee and on the floor. Scripts are prepared for the committee process, both for a committee of reference and the Appropriations Committee. The scripts are prepared separately for the Senate and the House. Members' parts in the scripts are clearly marked, and members are broken up in smaller groups to aid the learning process. Bills and fiscal impact statements for each of the bills discussed during the mock committee hearing are also provided to each member. The mock committee is chaired by a returning legislator who is a standing committee chair and staffed by nonpartisan legislative staff, basically the same staff that always staffs committees. We emphasize to members that they need to pay attention to the legislative procedure they are learning rather than to the content of the bills that are used in the scripts. After the mock committee hearings, new members also participate in interactive mock second and third reading proceedings. In the Senate, a script and bill materials are used by the President of the Senate Majority Leader, and the Secretary of the Senate and her staff to teach new members the process and rules for second and third readings. In the House, the same training is done by the Speaker, the House Majority Leader, and the Chief Clerk of the House and her staff. Phase 2 also includes some lectures by nonpartisan legislative staff on what the nonpartisan legislative service agencies can do for them. And as a part of this, the Director of the Joint Budget Committee staff provides an in-depth description of the budget process. This is also when we give them their state-issued laptop computers and train them on how to use the laptop safely and ethically, and how to use the legislature's internet and website. And the spouses are not overlooked. They have the option of attending a one-day program during Phase 2. The program highlights a panel made up of spouses and companions of returning legislators who talk about the expectations and challenges that face them as spouses and companions of legislators. And finally, Phase 3 is the last of the phases provided specifically for new members. It's held for 2 days in mid-December, and it tends to correspond with the deadline for the first 3 bill requests for new members so they can get their bill requests in while they're in Denver. Nonpartisan legislative staff and the Joint Budget Committee staff, the Research Office, and the Legal Services Office are the trainers for really the entire phase, except for some of the panels that are held during the lunch hour. And most of the phase is delivered via lecture. It focuses primarily on the budget and starts out with an overall picture of the state's revenue structure and constitutional spending limits. And I and the other folks who talk about that try very hard to demystify it and make it easy to understand and something that they can retain. Lectures tend to last for about an hour or more and cover the budgets for the 6 largest departments, infrastructure funding, and water law. And the 6 largest departments are healthcare, human services, K-12 education, higher education, corrections, and the judicial department. There is one interactive exercise provided at the very end of the program where members are split up into small groups and charged with balancing the state budget. During the phases 2 and 3, we also provide opportunities for new members to learn from others that are involved in the legislative process, not just legislative staff and some returning legislators. During luncheon panels, new members hear from legislative leadership, former legislators, lobbyists, and the press. And then finally, come January, when the legislative session starts, everyone's favorite part of the training, a required 90-minute session on ethics and sexual harassment that all members of the legislature attend. Trainers include nonpartisan legislative staff, staff of the National Conference of State Legislatures, and other outside presenters. So now I've talked about what our program is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the planning process. We start planning for new member orientation as early as our workload allows, usually in mid-May, right after the legislative session ends. More than 40 staff from 3 nonpartisan legislative staff agencies, the Chief Clerk of the House and her staff, and the Secretary of the Senate and her staff participate in the planning process. Our program is fairly extensive, so we divide up the work into 6 working groups, 1 for each phase, 1 for the spouses program, 1 for the ethics and sexual harassment program, and 1 team that focuses on the logistics for all phases, such as catering and room rentals. We have found that it really helps to have 1 team handle the logistics for everyone. That way the budget is more easily managed and the working groups for each phase can focus on curriculum and training. Our program coordinator for the 2010 program gave this advice to planners. Start as early as possible, give plenty of opportunities for those involved in planning to communicate effectively, document everything, including minutes from every meeting, what things cost and which businesses cut you a deal, and try to keep continuity in your top planning staff over time. In addition, we've done a little bit of training the trainers in Colorado. We've put on a training exercise for faculty of new member orientation on effective public speaking. Feedback has been a very important tool we've used to help us make our program better. Most vocal feedback we've received is that there's too much information and they don't like being talked at. This is mostly feedback from phase 3, which is the phase where we flood them with lectures about the budget. Members did indicate that they really like the interactive exercises in phases 2 and 3. That leads me directly to the changes we're considering making to our program. We are looking to make our training more interactive, particularly our training on the budget. We know from adult learning theory that adults learn much better when they interact with the material they're learning and are allowed to bring their own experience and knowledge to it. They also learn much better when they're having fun and aren't bored. We also want to make the materials we provide more interactive. We're looking to make DVDs, audio resources, and webinars of seminars on particular subjects available on our website. In addition, the entire legislature is working toward using less paper over the next several years, and we're considering doing that for new member orientation also. We're looking to move the technology training up from the end of phase 2 to the beginning of phase 1, so it will be the very beginning of their orientation programs. At that time, members would receive tablet computers instead of laptops, and the tablet computers would be loaded with electronic copies of the materials for the entire program. In addition, we're thinking about doing budget training during the second phase rather than the third phase, so that the interactive committee exercises and the mock floor exercises that are usually done during the second phase can be conducted in December, which is much closer to the beginning of the legislative session. Our goal for this change is to help members retain this information a bit better at the beginning of the session that starts in January. And that concludes my prepared remarks.
Great, Natalie, really appreciate that. And we are now at the point of getting your questions and answers, or getting your questions and we'll provide the answers. So you can use the chat box that shows on your screen. You can type questions to us and send them, and we'll handle as many as we can in the remaining 15 minutes going forward. But what I want to start out first is with a question for all of our faculty that Natalie touched on in her piece, and that is how you get your presenters on the same page as your planner. Natalie talked about setting up a train the trainer session where you give advice on giving presentations. What things do you do in your states? And let's start with Wendy, but all of you can pitch in. What do you do to get your presenters ready to present in a fashion that fits within your overall theme of new member orientation?
Thanks, Bruce. I really like Natalie's idea, and I've been kind of trying to take some mental notes here because I think that's a great way to do it. Ours has been much more informal, and as I'm confirming speakers, I just do one-on-ones with them and talk about both, again, adult learning styles, as well as talk about here is really what our goals are for this particular area. And so I'm pretty much framing their boundaries for what we'd like them to discuss, because I think a lot of times the people we bring in as presenters, they have so much expertise that they can just start really talking about that at length. And so I think it's important as you're having the discussions to really focus in on what the goal is from their particular presentation.
And Sheila, any thoughts?
Well, obviously, you know, I've been a presenter as a legislator, and I think it helps when the organizers are very clear on what they want you to cover as a presenter. I think that helps a lot.
Okay, and Natalie, any further thoughts on your train the trainer ideas or anything else in preparing presenters?
Well, thanks, Bruce. I think the train the trainer, the process we did in Colorado was very short. It was only about an hour and a half, 2 hour long training, but I think it made a big impact for some folks, but not for every folks. I really like what Wendy said, that she sits down one-on-one with them to train them, and I think that would be helpful. Okay.
And Sheila, I'd like to pick up with you for a moment on the constituent service, the idea that you know, a critical piece of being a legislator is doing constituent casework, connecting out, whether it be for these town halls or just the standard help me with my, you know, working with the Department of Natural Resources or whatever it might be. But what sort of things do you emphasize in the constituent casework training? What sort of things seem to be helpful in connecting with the new members and giving them a sense of what they have to do to handle that end of their legislative duties?
Well, I think first, this is another example of where you need to know where to go to, because obviously you become a legislator and you're getting constituent queries about all sorts of issues, and so it's a matter of knowing where to go. But there's also just the formality of how to keep track of constituent contacts, keeping good files, keeping good lists, and also responding in a very timely fashion, not waiting for 2 weeks before you get back to your constituents. And so it's knowing where to go, which a lot of this, while the orientation helps, it's also a matter of it's learning on the job. And so, but it's also emphasizing the importance of, if your constituents aren't happy, you're going to have a major problem staying in office. And so it's responding in a timely fashion, not telling people what they want to hear, but being tactful in how you respond to them and what you tell them.
That's a great point on not telling people what they want to hear. The big horror stories we hear from new legislators are on over-promising and then not being able to continue with them. So thank you for that. One of the questions that we've gotten won't apply to a couple of our states, where Colorado and Wyoming, where there aren't necessarily individual staffers, but we do have a question about how you go about assigning new aides, assistants to freshman members. So Sheila, if you don't mind me going back, since Wisconsin's the one state that has some staff for individual legislators, can you tell a little bit about the process that freshmen might go through in getting new staff for their offices?
Well, as legislators in Wisconsin, we are responsible for hiring our own staff, and we do have our very own staff. And so it is something that I know when I was a legislator, I wanted an experienced staffer because I felt that that would help me. Since I was so new, that experienced staffer was very valuable to me. But it is about, making sure that you hire someone who has similar values and who is going to operate as a team member, and someone that you are comfortable with, your personalities mesh.
Great. And I don't mean to cut Natalie and Wendy off of this. I realize you don't have personal staff for the most part. You may have some interns in Colorado, but any suggestions on the hiring of new staff that you might have to add?
In Wyoming, I unfortunately do not.
Okay, well, let's take another piece of the new member orientation, and that was mentioned in terms of the spouse. We've heard from a number of states that spouse training and getting new members on the right start with the sort of work, legislature, life balance is critically important, and probably the biggest thing to undermine a legislator's career is if the family's not on board, then the career isn't going to last. So any suggestions that you might have on the spousal programs, the importance of that, the chance to allow the spouses to ask the questions that they really have on what all this new career means for them. So any of the three of you, feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll start, I guess. No one, okay. I think I'm not aware that we have a spouse orientation part of the program, but I think it's a great idea because obviously as a legislator, you have to have the support of your spouse and your family. And there's tremendous challenges with the job as far as time commitment. It's not an 8 to 5 job. There's evening things, there's weekend events. And so I think it's a great opportunity to incorporate the spouse into being a part with their spouse as a legislator, and to really touch on and give them an opportunity to ask questions to the degree that they're interested in getting involved.
Great. And two things. We've had a number of questions come through on the availability of the slides. They will be on the website as of next week. Any problems in that whatsoever, you've got my email on this current slide, so email me if there are any problems in getting that next week, but they will be available. The entire presentation will be archived, so that will be available to you. We've also gotten a question on how much time is spent by individual staff members in the buddy system. Just what kind of investment is this? So our buddy expert, Natalie, will reveal this.
Well, in Colorado, our buddy system has been very successful, and it really depends as far as how much time is spent by individual staff members. It depends on the member and what their needs are. As staffers, we contact them as soon as possible, and so there's a bit of a time right at the very beginning when we're calling them, when we're emailing them, and we're meeting with them. Some of us might just meet with them for 15 minutes, some of us go to coffee with them, but really it's led by the legislator as what they want and what they need. I had a buddy that I had starting in 2004, and that buddy was in the legislature through 2010, and through that entire legislative career, he would send me emails regularly because he had me on his speed dial, and I would just send that information off to other parts of state government and other legislative service agencies, and I kind of acted as kind of a staff assistant for him. And this was a man who ended up being the Senate Minority Leader, so he knew the institution by the time he finished, but he knew that I was always there, ready and waiting to help him. So it really depends. Some of us spend a lot of time, some of us not that much time. We're all senior staff. No new staff are assigned this job, and it's just a part of doing our job.
If I could just add, we don't have a buddy system, but one of the things that I would encourage states to consider is having a mentor system for legislators. A little bit different than the buddy system, but having a fellow legislator that's a mentor can be very, very helpful. I know I really value that, but it really is important to pick a mentor that has similar views, probably has a similar district to yours, and that you can use as a resource on the process, drafting legislation, and any other issues that you have.
Excellent. We've also had a question come through on copies of the agendas. This gives a segue to say that you will be getting, the participants will be getting new member orientation surveys somewhere in the next month or two, where we'll be seeking surveys. I'll be getting copies from these states that have been mentioned today up on the NCSL website within the next month or so. But this is a kickoff on new member orientation, and we're aiming to survey to get more recent information going forward, and we'll be putting that up on NCSL's legislature's website. And again, any questions on any of these that you can't find, email me at the address on here, and we'll take the questions specifically as well. What I want to do now in the last couple of minutes remaining is to give each of our presenters, and we'll go in reverse order, a chance to give one or two final tips, lessons learned, or words of wisdom. So Natalie, you're first up on our endpoint words of wisdom.
Thanks, Bruce. I think the most important thing that we have heard from our new members, feedback that we've gotten from them, is they don't want too much information. They don't want to be talked at. They want to interact with the material, and they want to be a part of it. And so in Colorado, we're working very hard to make the changes to our program in order to do that, and I think that's something important for everyone.
Great. Sheila, go ahead.
Okay, I would just encourage having hands-on, allowing for participation by your members, allowing them time to get to know each other as well, but really using it as a time to provide them with who to contact, resources, and the available services and tools that are at their fingertips in order to communicate with their constituents and be a good public servant.
Great. And Wendy, you get the last word.
Great. I think it cannot be stressed enough, the thinking behind what do you need to know to be successful at the very next point. So constantly keeping that in mind as you do your planning to help with not overwhelming them, and then again making them you know, these are bright people, and they're there to get involved, and making them an interactive part of the entire effort, I think, is going to pay benefits in the long run.
Well, great. Well, please join me in your various locations in thanking this wonderful panel, and I hope their ideas, their advice, their tips, their lessons learned will help you as an ongoing basis. And a final reminder that NCSL will be seeking your information in upcoming surveys, and we'll continue to learn together. Thanks so much for joining us today, and please join us for an upcoming NCSL webinar. Good day.